My work rival drunk texted me by mistake. What she sent left us both completely speechless. The text came at 12:04 on a Friday night, which was already wrong, because Reed Callahan did not text me at midnight. Reed Callahan did not text me at all, outside of the narrow professional register we had maintained with near-religious discipline for 9 months. Meeting logistics, shared document links, the occasional one-line reply to a thread where we had both been CC'd and were both pretending the other's name in the chain wasn't something we were tracking. We were rivals in the specific way that people are rivals when they are too professional to call it that. Which meant we were very good at it. I want to describe what 9 months of that kind of rivalry actually looks like from the inside, because it is different from what people imagine. It doesn't look like conflict. It doesn't look like anything most of the time. It looks like two people in the same conference room who listen to each other's contributions with complete attentiveness and never quite echo them, who give each other's presentations exactly the amount of visible credit the room requires and no more, who run on parallel tracks through the same organizational space without the tracks ever quite touching. We had mastered this. We had 9 months of practice, and we were both good at it, and I think if you had asked either of us, we would have told you we were comfortable with it. We were not comfortable with it. We had simply gotten very good at the performance of being comfortable with it, which is a different thing. Reed was good at his job. That was the complicating factor, the one I had been dealing with privately since approximately month 2, when I had read a client analysis he produced and thought, against my better interests, this is accurate and well constructed, and I learned something from it. That thought had been inconvenient. I had filed it away and continued running. His name on my phone at midnight was an event. I looked at it for a moment before opening it. The way you pause at something when the context is fundamentally wrong. Not hostile wrong, just, this belongs to a different category of night than the one I'm having. The message was long. Long enough to tell me, before I'd read a word of it, that whatever it was had not been composed for me. I received messages from Reed. They are 8 words or fewer. They are never long. I read it anyway. Twice, I turned it down. Emailed Park tonight, told her I'm withdrawing my candidacy. Can't explain all of it over text, but I found out what the role actually is, and it's not what either of us thought it was. Whoever signs the Q3 report Thursday owns everything in it, and the numbers in it are not what they were in January. I'm not doing it. I'd rather start somewhere else. The funny part, the actually funny part, is that I've spent 9 months trying to be better than the one person I think is actually better than me. And now I'm leaving before she finds out she's walking into something that was built to need a fall person. I should tell her. I don't know how to tell her. I don't know if she'd even believe me. I read it once. I read it again. I set the phone down on the couch cushion beside me and sat with it for a moment in the way you sit with something that has just arrived from an entirely different category than what you were expecting. I want to be specific about the feeling, because it is not the obvious one. It was not triumph. Nothing in the message invited that. It was not the satisfaction of finding out your rival is withdrawn, though that is what the first line said. What I felt was something closer to the feeling of suddenly understanding the shape of a room you've been in for 9 months. You were told it was one kind of room. You'd been moving through it accordingly. And now someone had accidentally, from their brother's contact list, at midnight, handed you the floor plan. He had not meant to send this to me. That much was obvious. He was texting someone, a brother, a friend, someone in the category of people you confess to rather than perform for, and he had, through whatever combination of Friday night and a drink or two and the specific carelessness of typing while tired, sent it to the wrong contact. the wrong name appearing first in a search that should have gone somewhere else. He had sent the message to its subject. He had sent it to me. For a moment, I genuinely did not know how to hold any of it. The withdrawal. The report. The Q3 numbers that were not what they had been in January. The phrase built to need a fall person, which landed differently the longer I sat with it. And underneath all of it, the last 3 sentences of a message that had not been intended for my eyes, addressed to someone who was supposed to hold them privately. The one person I think is actually better than me. And now I'm leaving before she finds out she's walking into something that was built to need a fall person. I should tell her. I don't know how to tell her. I read those sentences again. Then I opened my laptop. I found the January version. I opened the most recent version, the one that had been circulated for review, the one that bore Helen Park's name in the document header as preparing executive. I put them side by side. And that was when my phone rang. Reed's name on the screen. Calling to fix his mistake. Calling to apologize. Calling to walk back a message that had gone somewhere it was never supposed to go. I answered before the second ring. "Don't hang up," he said. The first words, before hello, before his name, before any of the professional scaffolding we had spent 9 months carefully constructing between us. "I know what I sent you. I know it was. I'm sorry. I was texting my brother and the autocomplete." He stopped. "I'm sorry." "Reed," I said. "I understand if this is Reed," I said. I have the January version of the Q3 report open on my laptop. And the current version. And I'm looking at the capital allocation figures. A silence on the line that was a different shape than the kind that comes from embarrassment. "How different are they?" he said. His voice had changed register. Not the apologizing voice. Something more focused and flatter. $16 million different, I said, in the division's operational overhead column. The January version shows actuals. The current version shows a figure that's 16 million lower, and the variance isn't explained anywhere in the document. He was quiet for long enough that I could hear something in the background. A television, maybe, or traffic. "That's more than I found," he said. "You found some of it." "I found the pattern," he said, "not the number." I let that sit. "Tell me about the pattern," I said. He told me. 9 months ago, when Reed had first been identified as a candidate for the senior role, he had done the thing that careful people do when they're considering a significant professional move. He had researched not just the role, but the people who had held it before him. The position had a predecessor, a woman named Claudine Marsh, who had held it for 18 months before leaving the company 3 years ago under circumstances that the official company history described, vaguely, as a transition to another opportunity. He had found Claudine through a professional network. He had reached out on a pretext, a question about the division's culture, the kind of outreach that looks like due diligence and is. She had responded. They had spoken twice on the phone. "She told me," he said, "that she left because she had signed a report. A financial summary for the board. She had reviewed it. She had trusted the figures she'd been given by the VP of Finance. She had signed it. And 3 months later, an audit had found a significant variance between the reported figures and the actuals. The variance wasn't her error. She hadn't generated the numbers. But her name was on the document, and the VP of Finance, who was Helen Park 3 years ago, before her promotion, had produced records suggesting the discrepancy had been flagged in a meeting Claudine had allegedly attended and approved. I was very still. Claudine hadn't attended that meeting, he said. There was a scheduling conflict. She had a documented reason she wasn't there. But her name was in the minutes. Someone had put it there. What happened? I said. She was given the choice between a very quiet departure with a reference letter, or a formal inquiry during which the meeting minutes would be entered into evidence. He paused. She took the departure. And Helen Park was promoted, I said. 8 months later, he said, into the role that Claudine had held. I looked at the 2 versions of the Q3 report open on my screen. The January figures and the current figures, and the $16 million gap between them that had no footnote and no explanation and no flagged variance anywhere in the summary. She's doing it again, I said. She's doing it again, he said. And whoever wins this promotion is the person who stands in front of the board Thursday morning and signs their name to a document with a number in it that is wrong. And 3 months from now, or 6 months, when someone notices the variance, the person with their name on the document is the person who approved it. I thought about 9 months of competition, every presentation reviewed against his, every project handoff calibrated to be slightly stronger, slightly more thorough, slightly harder to dismiss. 9 months of running toward a finish line that was, it turned out, the beginning of something very different than what we'd been told we were running toward. I thought about Helen Park's August email in my inbox, filed and forgotten. The confirmation I had given her aligned with the updated capital structure. Without knowing what the updated capital structure was, without having any reason to know, because she had asked a confirmatory question rather than shared the document itself. A paper trail built out of our professional diligence. We had been careful, thorough, responsive, and she had used all 3 of those qualities to put our names on a framework we had never seen. You were going to leave, I said, without telling me. A silence. I was trying to figure out how to tell you, he said. That's what I was texting my brother about. That's what I was trying to work out the words. The words were in the text, I said. Yes, he said. The wrong person received them. I looked at the 2 versions of the report. At the gap in the numbers. At the specific way the current version had been formatted to make the variance invisible unless you had the January version for comparison, which I had, in a folder on my laptop for no better reason than that I saved things and had not deleted them. Read, I said. Yes. I have the January version. Do you have Claudine Marsh's contact? A pause that felt like something recalibrating. Yes, he said. Then we're not finished yet, I said. Can you be here in 40 minutes? He was here in 35. I had not thought, at any point in 9 months of professional rivalry, about what Reed Callahan looked like when he arrived at someone's apartment, carrying a laptop bag and a folder of documents, and the specific expression of someone who has just had a very unexpected Friday night. He looked like a person, which sounds obvious, but is not, because people you compete with tend to flatten into their professional surfaces over time, and surfaces don't carry the particular look of a man standing at your door at 12:40 in the morning with printed out evidence of a scheme to use one of you as a scapegoat. He had, it turned out, a face that did things other than present. Come in, I said. He came in. There was a brief moment in the doorway where both of us were aware of the strangeness of the situation. 9 months of careful professional distance, and now this, an apartment at midnight, documents under his arm. And then the strangeness resolved itself into the only rational response, which was to get to work. We sat at my kitchen table. He set up his laptop. I had mine already open. The 2 versions of the Q3 report were still side by side on my screen. He looked at them and said, "You found the capital allocation column. 16 million, I said. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone who had suspected the number but is now looking at the specifics for the first time. I found the reclassification structure in an earlier email thread, he said. But I hadn't run the comparison yet. I was building toward it. When did you start looking? I said. 6 weeks ago, he said. After the second call with Claudine Marsh. She described the structure of what happened to her, the report, the meeting minutes, the variants discovered 3 months after her name was on the document, and I started looking for the same structure in the current Q3 framework. It took me 4 weeks to find enough to be sure. He paused, and then I didn't know what to do with it. I thought about that. 4 weeks of sitting with knowledge you weren't supposed to have, about a situation you hadn't expected to find, involving a person you weren't sure would believe you or trust your motives for telling her. Why did you withdraw? I said. Rather than telling me and dealing with it together? He looked at the laptop screen. Because telling you required trusting that you'd believe me, he said. And we are. He gestured slightly at the space between us, the professionally maintained distance that had characterized 9 months of operating in the same organizational space. We are not the kind of colleagues who trust each other with things that matter. That was honest enough to be briefly uncomfortable. We weren't, I said. No, he said. We weren't. A pause. I also, he said, with the care of someone choosing words, wasn't sure you'd want my help, even if you believed me. Some people would rather fight their own battles. Some people would, I said. $16 million is a lot to fight alone. Something shifted in his expression. Not relief exactly. The thing that arrives before relief. When you realize the conversation is going to be different than you were braced for. Right, he said. Then let's look at it together. We did. We laid the 2 reports side by side in physical printed form. He had brought printed copies of both, which told me something about how long he had actually been preparing for a conversation he wasn't sure he was going to have. We went through them column by column with the focused attention of 2 people who had demonstrated to each other over 9 months that they were both extremely thorough, and who were now applying that thoroughness in the same direction for the first time. The variance was not subtle once you had both documents. The capital allocation column in the current version had been compressed. The individual line items were intact, but one overhead category had been reclassified in a way that moved $16 million from the operating expenditure section into a capital investment subcategory that was not covered by the board's quarterly review scope. It was not invisible, but it was a change that required knowing what the January figures had looked like to identify as a change, rather than simply reading the current document and seeing correct-looking numbers in correctly formatted columns. It's not invented, I said, after we had gone through it twice. The $16 million is real. It exists in the document. It's just in a different place, a place the board won't look at Thursday. And the board presentation is built on the current version, Reed said. If the presentation goes forward with these numbers, and the board approves the strategy based on them, and the variance is discovered in the next audit cycle, the person who presented it and signed it is responsible for the classification decision, I said. And the classification decision is the decision that moved $16 million. Yes, he said. I sat back from the table. Outside, the city was doing its quiet late Friday work. A car moving through the street below. Something distant. Inside, just the 2 laptops and the printed pages, and the particular silence of 2 people who have just looked directly at something and agreed on what it is. She was going to use both of us, I said. Whichever one won the promotion was the primary name on the document. But we'd both confirmed awareness of the framework in August. Either way, she had a path. Either way, she had someone, Reed said. I thought about Claudine Marsh. The meeting minutes with her name in them, a meeting she hadn't attended, documented as if she had. The quiet departure and the reference letter and the roll that went to Helen 8 months later. 3 years of silence. And now the same architecture, rebuilt for different people, with better documentation, because 3 years is enough time to refine and approach. She's careful, I said. She's practiced, Reed said. And then, there's something else. After the calls with Claudine, I went back through the company's public disclosures for the last 4 fiscal years. The Q3 variance that forced Claudine out was never publicly disclosed as an error. It was described in the annual report the following year as a strategic reclassification of capital assets, which is the same language used in the current version. I looked at the Q3 report on my screen. At the section heading above the reclassified column, Strategic Capital Reclassification File Alignment. She didn't just do this once, I said. She's been doing it as long as she's been in this role, he said. The Claudine situation removed the person who might have noticed, and after that, no one else had been close enough to the figures to compare versions. Until now, I said. Until you saved a reference copy in January, he said. For no better reason than habit. She's careful, I said again. But she didn't account for people who save things they don't need. He looked at me. And in that look, the specific look of someone who has been sitting with a burden for 6 weeks and has just found a place to set it down, something shifted. Not between us exactly. In the room. In the quality of the night. We have to go above her, I said. Do you have a contact? From the cross-functional review last spring, I said. A woman named Patricia Osai. She chairs the committee. Would she take a contact on a weekend? I looked at the 2 versions of the report open on my screen. I looked at the board presentation scheduled for Thursday morning and the signatures that would go on a document with numbers in it that were wrong, and the 3-year-old pattern, and Claudine Marsh's departure, and the August email confirming alignment with a framework neither of us had been given. Yes, I said. I think she would. We built the submission over the next 2 hours. Not an accusation. We had learned, from looking at what Helen had built over 3 years, that accusations require proof of intent. And intent is the hardest thing to document. We built a factual comparison. 2 versions of the same report. The variance clearly identified, column by column, with the specific reclassification mapped to its effect on what the board's quarterly review covered, the August email chain, showing that we had confirmed alignment with a capital structure framework neither of us had been given to review. And 1 additional document, a written summary Reed had prepared after his second call with Claudine Marsh, with her permission to share it, describing the structure of what had happened to her 3 years earlier, and the specific language. Strategic Capital Reclassification. That appeared in both that situation and the current one. We sent the package to Patricia Osai at 2:47 in the morning. We sent it, and then we sat back and neither of us spoke immediately, and the kitchen was quiet in the way it gets past 2 a.m. When whatever performance the night had required is finished, and what remains is whatever was underneath the performance. She's going to know it was us, he said. Yes, I said. Eventually, does that concern you? I thought about it honestly. Less than the alternative, I said. He nodded. He looked at the table, and then at the papers spread across it, and then at his own handwriting in the margins of the printed report, annotations I was seeing for the first time, despite 9 months of working in the same division. Because we had spent those months being thorough in opposite directions, and the margins of each other's thinking had not been available. The handwriting was precise and legible. It had opinions. I should tell you something, he said, still at the papers, not at me. Okay, I said. The text I sent. He paused. The end of it. The part about, I read the whole thing, I said. He was quiet. You said, I said, carefully, that you'd spent 9 months trying to be better than the one person you think is actually better than you. He didn't say anything. You can tell me that's not what you meant, I said. It's what I meant, he said. The kitchen was very quiet. And then you said, I said, that you were leaving before I found out I was walking into something that was built to need a fall person. Yes, you were going to leave, I said. Without the promotion. Without. And not tell me. Just leave. I was going to tell you, he said. I had been trying to find the right way to tell you. That's what I was texting my brother about. He looked at me then, and his face had the particular expression of someone who has just been forced to be significantly more honest than they had planned to be, on a significantly accelerated timeline. I didn't know how to tell you without it looking like I was either running a strategy or the other thing. The other thing, I said. Yes, he said. And that was the moment. That was the moment that left us both completely speechless. Not the text at midnight. Not the $16 million. Not the comparison of 2 reports that showed a woman's 3-year construction of a mechanism for transferring blame. It was this, Reed Callahan, who had been my professional weather for 9 months, looking at me in my kitchen at 3 in the morning and not finishing a sentence, because neither of us needed him to. Neither of us said anything for a long time. There is a specific quality to the silence that happens when 2 people have just been more honest than they planned to be, and are both deciding what to do with the honesty. It is not uncomfortable. It is the silence that exists when something has been said that cannot unsay itself, and both people are realizing, at the same moment, that they are not sorry it cannot. The promotion isn't a prize, he said eventually. Not about the other thing, about the work, about Helen, about the structure we'd both been running inside without understanding what it was. It's a chair you sit in while someone else controls the music. And we competed for 9 months, I said, to be the person who sat in it. We did, he said, and after a moment, though I will say, in the interest of accuracy, that I competed harder after the 2nd month than I had before it. Why the 2nd month? I said. You presented the Meridian case study in the August strategy session, he said. The 3-scenario model. I had been planning to present something similar, and I saw yours, and I thought, hers is better. And then I spent the next 7 months trying to build something that was better than better. He looked at the table. It seemed, at the time, like a professional problem. It turned out to be a different kind of problem entirely, which I became aware of gradually. Gradually, I said. Very gradually, he said. I'm a slow study in things that aren't numerical. I laughed, the first real laugh of the evening, which had contained very little that was funny until now. He looked up when I laughed, and the expression on his face was the one that should be filed under. Things you notice too late and then cannot stop noticing. Then he said, Patricia Osei responded. I grabbed my phone. 4 lines. She had reviewed the materials. She was convening a pre-board review session Wednesday morning. Thursday's presentation was to be postponed pending that review. And both of us were to hold our calendars and speak to no one at the organization about the submission until we heard from her office. We looked at each other across the table. She moved fast, he said. She's an audit committee chair, I said. This is exactly the thing she's supposed to move fast for. Yes, he said. And then, after a moment, we did this. We did this, I said. It was 3:47 in the morning. We had arrived at that hour through documents and phone calls and a submission to an email address I'd had to look up in a contact list, and we were sitting in a kitchen that smelled like coffee that had been made too long ago. Neither of us moved to leave. Neither of us, in the particular honesty of 4 in the morning, pretended that was about the work. The Thursday board presentation did not happen on Thursday. It was rescheduled for 6 weeks later, after an audit committee review that I was not permitted to attend, but was informed about by Patricia Osai in 2 calls and 1 written summary. The capital reclassification was reversed. The Q3 report was represented with the January figures, and the board's record was corrected. Helen Park announced a departure for personal reasons in October. The language the company used was transition to another opportunity, which was the same language that had been used for Claudine 3 years earlier, and which I suspect will be used for someone else 3 years from now if no one is paying attention. The senior role remained open for the rest of the year while the division was restructured. It was eventually filled by someone brought in from outside, someone who did not have 9 months of competing with Reed for it, someone who arrived into a position that was, by then, an actual job rather than a mechanism. Neither of us got the promotion we had spent 9 months running toward, which was, given what we now knew about what the promotion had been, an outcome significantly better than the alternative. Reed didn't leave. We had coffee the following Monday, in the company cafeteria, in a corner that neither of us had sat in before because it was too far from the conference rooms we'd been orbiting. He ordered something plain. I ordered something complicated. He raised an eyebrow at the complexity of the order, but did not comment on it, and I noted the raised eyebrow and filed it in a category that had not previously existed. We talked about the audit committee review and what would happen next, and what we thought the organization would do with the Helen Park situation. Then we talked about other things. The hospital renovation project he'd been pulled into as a secondary consultant, a weekend trip I'd taken to see a friend who had moved cities and was adjusting to the adjustment. The conversation moved the way conversations move when there isn't a strategic purpose underneath them. It had a different weight. He had known, he said, for some time that he preferred my company to our competition. I had known something similar and had been categorizing it. For 9 months, as a tactical assessment, he was interesting, therefore understand him, therefore be better than him. The interesting part was accurate. The therefore had been wrong. It takes, sometimes, a wrong text at midnight to correct a mislabeling. I think about what the text contained, all of it, the withdrawal, the pattern, the warning he had been trying to find words for. The one person I think is actually better than me. The message sent to the wrong person at the right moment, which is the kind of thing that is impossible to plan and occasionally, improbably, happens anyway. I think about what we were running toward for 9 months. 2 careful, thorough people building the strongest possible case for why each of them should be the one to stand in front of a board and put their name on a document that was wrong. I think about how good we both were at the running, and how little either of us had stopped to ask what was at the finish line, or who had drawn the line there, or why. I think about Claudine Marsh, about 3 years of silence and a reference letter and a departure framed as a transition. About what it costs to be made to look like the person who made the error, when the error was placed beneath your name without your knowledge, and before you'd had the chance to compare 2 versions of a document you didn't know existed in 2 versions. I think about how close we both came to being that same story. I think about what it would have felt like, 6 months after the fact, to understand what had happened, and to have no January version to show anyone, and no Reed who had found Claudine, and no audit committee chair who moved fast, because the materials were clear, and the situation was exactly the kind of thing her function existed to catch. I think about all the versions of this story, where a different small thing goes differently, and the version the company gets is not a corrected Q3 report, but a departure framed as a transition to another opportunity. It takes, sometimes, a wrong keystroke in a contact field at midnight. It takes someone who couldn't walk past what they found even when walking past it would have been easier, cleaner, and far less likely to result in a 2am kitchen table covered in printed documents with a person who was, until that evening, their main competition for a promotion neither of them ended up taking. She is now the director of financial oversight at a company across the city. She reached out to Reed a month after the audit committee review. She said, "Thank you." She said she hadn't known if telling him would matter. She said she was glad it had. I have not met her yet. I think I will. I think there is a conversation available there that would be worth having about what it costs to carry something like that for 3 years, and what it feels like when it surfaces, and what the difference is between the version of the story where it gets corrected and the version where it doesn't. The version where it doesn't is the version that was running smoothly until 12:04 on a Friday night. There is something I keep returning to about that night. Not the 16 million or the audit committee or even the text and its wrong recipient. It's the specific shape of what Reed had been doing for 6 weeks before midnight on that Friday. He had found something. He had spent 4 weeks being sure of it. And then he had spent 2 more weeks trying to find a way to tell the person it most directly affected. The person who was also, structurally, his main competition. The person who had the most reason to be suspicious of his motives for bringing it to her. He had been trying to find a way to tell me. Not to protect himself, he had already decided to leave, which removed him from the situation entirely. Not to win anything. Telling me cost him the clean exit he'd arranged. He was trying to tell me because he had looked at what was being built and couldn't make himself walk past it. Because 6 weeks of sitting with knowledge you haven't been able to act on is its own kind of weight, and the weight had been getting heavier, and he had been texting his brother at midnight on a Friday trying to find the right words to put it down. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of thing that is easy to dress up as simply doing the right thing, and it is the right thing. But it is also harder than that, and anyone who has ever sat with a 6-week decision they couldn't make knows that the right thing and the easy thing are not always the same address. The right thing can sit on you for weeks. The right thing can cost you the clean version of your own exit. He did it anyway. The wrong person received the message. The right thing got done. The text went to the wrong person. Everything followed from that. And somewhere in the middle of everything that followed, between the January report and the audit committee submission and the particular honesty of 4 in the morning, something else happened that had nothing to do with $16 million or capital reclassification. 2 people who had been running a careful parallel race for 9 months discovered that the track they'd been on had been designed by someone else, for someone else's purposes, and that neither of them had looked closely enough at the architecture to notice. And in noticing together, at the wrong hour, for the wrong reason, with the wrong text as the catalyst, they became the kind of people who know each other. Not rivals, exactly. Not anymore. Something that requires a different word, which neither of us has formally agreed on yet, though I have some thoughts. Have you ever been in a competition so consuming that you forgot to look at what you were competing for, and found out, too late or just in time, that the thing you were running toward was never what it looked like from where you were standing? Have you ever received something that was meant for someone else? A message typed in the honesty of a late night, addressed to the wrong name, and felt the specific, disorienting vertigo of knowing that the wrong delivery was the only reason you have what you now have? Tell me about it in the comments. And if you want more stories about the moments that arrive through the wrong door and change everything anyway, subscribe. I'll be here.